Welcome to the Plant Grow Reap podcast.
Welcome back to Plant Grow Reap. I'm Andrea McKenna, and today I am joined by the beautiful couple sitting across from me. Not couple, but they're my favourite couple. Peter and Paul. That's funny too, isn't it? Because Peter and Paul kind of go together. So well done.
You know
well
what
done,
they
the two of
normally
you.
do? They sit on a wall.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen you two sit on a wall today, but we'll see if we can make that happen. If that's what it's about at Aintree Group, making things happen. Making things happen. So between the three of us, there are a number of years of business advisory, and we've had varying successes along the way and changes in our path. Peter, you in particular have had lots and lots of different things that you have done along the way, lots of experiences and different environments as well. So that's what we want to talk about today as well. It's not just about being in business, but sometimes being part of a business or being employed by a business. And what we also want to talk about is commercial and corporate mindset. So for our listeners to Plant Grow Reap, mostly what we talk about are, business improvement type things. So it's about giving our audience a bit of an understanding about what our expectations have been along the way, what we've had, positive things that have had come from decisions that we've made, and then, any blunders that we've made along the way too, because we've all made blunders, whether we've been business owners or employees of businesses. And I think it's important that sometimes we talk a lot as business advisors to our clients about businesses that they run. We're not often giving advice to people who are employed in businesses. So we're talking to the people who are making decisions, not the ones who are having decisions made around them. And sometimes it's easy for us to forget that we give information to people so that they can run their businesses, but we don't necessarily tell them how they can communicate that to their teams to create a better environment for the team. And we forget to do it here too sometimes. And we've worked out, I think you've been with us for a little while now, Paul, as well. Over the last 6 months or 12 months, we've started to give the team lots more information than what we would have given them before.
Yep.
And explanations as to why we're doing things. And it's starting to click now, isn't it?
Yes, it is, definitely.
Yeah. So let's talk about what does being commercial really mean. So not being commercial from a business owner's perspective, but potentially from an employee's perspective. What do you think, Paul?
The commerciality. So as an employee, the understanding the value that they are to the company and the value they are to their clients. And that's getting back to understanding client needs and clients' requirements as well. So because we're a service-based business, then it's all about understanding what the client's needs are, because we need to understand that to be able to service them. That relates to the fees that we charge them as well, and value for money.
Yep.
And so for me, a lot of the commercialisation factors are about value and understanding client needs.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think, Peter?
Well, I think it's about connection.
Yep.
So the lawyers need to understand, because I'm looking at it from generally from a legal perspective, but not always. The lawyers need to, and generally do, understand the succession journey for a client, and that's for a client's business and for the client's family.
Yeah.
So how do these things work together? And you've got to always have that top of mind as a practicing lawyer. So that's not apparent when people start practicing law, because they go to uni and they learn a subject.
Yeah.
So they become an interested person in a particular area, but things are connected. So I've always had the view that a lawyer is a lawyer that covers everything rather than just this area.
Yes.
And of course the modern trend is to be a specialist and deeply involved, but that's blinkers to me, and I think the lawyers that we want to encourage and develop are rounded individuals,
Yep.
rounded professionals. So it's about the connections.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think it's important in that conversation to understand that you can be a specialist in an area, but you still have to have a much broader outlook, don't you? Like you cannot, to be really valuable in any organisation, if you're planning on being part of an organisation or being a general business advisor, is that you can have a specialisation, but you still have to know a lot of things about a lot of things so that you can go to someone else if you need that specialisation in particular. So you can't run a business or be a truly valuable team member unless you've got a really broad outlook about what your part in that business means.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from an accounting point of view, it's that compliance mentality. So we all get into the thing that we're just preparing a tax return and not understanding who's behind that tax return and what their needs are as well. So you've got to sort of broaden their scope when the employees or the accountants are working on a job and understanding that it's more about than just preparing a tax return.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and that's the same in any business really. Like there's whatever the core business is that you do is just the task that you're doing for someone.
Yes.
It's a person in the end, and they have goals and aspirations and desires and needs, and the more you know about that, the better you can be at the task stuff that you are oriented on.
Absolutely.
Regardless of what industry you're in. Peter, the point about making sure that you're a well-rounded person, you've been around for a while, and that's a good thing. Being a well-rounded person just in general and in life, so getting lots of life experience around it, because you've been a lawyer but you've also been other things, and I think that's what makes you a really good business and commercial advisor, is because you haven't just done one thing, you've done lots of things. And I think people get in their mind that they, get out of uni and I'm going to do this as my job and I'm going to do it forever. Yeah. And just if you can add a little bit of value around not doing something forever, but,
I think I might have made the point quietly this week that forever started for me in professional practice 50 years ago this week in Camberwell. And forever was going to be forever because the practice I went to, that was what I was going to do, keep practicing.
Yeah, and they still practice, don't they?
And they're still there and I still work very closely with them and have a huge respect for them. That changed, and there's lots of reasons for that, and it's quite an interesting story, none of which is relevant at the moment, but turned out, and I've just done a little list there, I've actually founded 9 different enterprises since then.
as a lawyer.
No,
Yeah.
not as a lawyer.
Yeah, and I
Not
think
as a
that's
lawyer.
important too.
Exactly.
Yeah, not as a lawyer.
Yeah, including law firms.
Yeah.
So the reason for that was that, and I think this comes back to your own makeup. In my situation, I'd come from a retailing background. The family was in retail, and law was the opposite of retail. It was actually a non-service industry at the time, going back half a century. The costs were all heavily regulated and all the disciplines were quite clear, and it was a very small, tightly knit profession.
Yeah.
And you knew pretty well everybody in it, and you knew all the barristers. And you didn't know the people on the other side of the Murray River because that was a different place entirely, let alone the other side of the world. Now, yesterday I had 4 separate clients that all have international businesses. So things have changed a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Things have changed a lot. But going back to this retail thing, that always worried me that when I struck this profession, it didn't make sense to me that the customer was ignored, really. It was about the law, right? So some of the things that I did were involved in bringing access to justice, which was a term that came about at that time. And since then, it's been the same driver to give people the opportunity to understand how the law works in practice. Mm-hmm. And in practice has to mean commercially.
Yep.
It has to mean commercially. So the people that we now represent are all individuals, of course, and the main thing for our lawyers to understand is, tell me more about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I need to know more about you. Because, for example, you might have somebody who's got a view about a staff member leaving, and they might say, well, look, they've been poached, but I'm going to make a commercial decision about the cost of fighting that issue because they might have gone to a competitor. Yeah. And that's one client. But another one might say, well, this is actually really serious because the reputation of my whole business depends on this and I can't afford to let that happen.
Yep.
So we need to understand that and then work out with the client, what are we going to do about it?
Yep.
So unless you get your brief right, don't try to do anything. And often you tell the client, you work with the client, so even though they want to fight and they want to be fierce, in the end, if they understand that they just need to look at it another way, and you've explained to them that you're there to keep them safe, they say, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of impression, or more than an impression, that's what we as lawyers, as a team, need to understand.
Yeah. And I think that it's important also for us to have a conversation around the fact that the more life experience you have, the better you become at having those conversations and knowing what it is that's important to ask a client when they come in. Yes. And so even for our younger people who are moving in and through the workforce, understanding that it's really important to get yourself out there and do things that are not just the things that you do in your everyday. Regardless of what profession you are in, whether it be professional services or retail or hospitality or whatever, the more that you know about the world around you, the better you can make commercial advice and commercial decisions, isn't it?
Yes.
You've got kids too, Paul, so you're probably saying to them along the lines, don't just focus on work. Like, work is important, but you've got to think about the world around you too.
You do, and I don't think that some young people understand that, doing that extra out of work activity, even being involved in, say, a sporting club or on committees or anything like that, just, getting involved with people older than them as well, so they're getting that sort of mentoring advice at a very early age. Yeah. And also getting out of their comfort zone. And I think of a lot of young people have always, not going back to our time as well, they've always said, oh, I'll just stay in my lane. Yeah. And as soon as we sort of start pushing them outside their lane and getting them to challenge themselves, then they start to think, oh, there is another world out there. Yeah. And I think that's really important for any young person to broaden their horizon and get outside their comfort zone. Yeah, yeah.
There used to be a time when, as an employer, you looked at someone's CV when they started with you, and if they'd worked at a place like McDonald's, for instance, as an employer, you were like, this person understands process and procedure and has even the most rudimentary commercial mindset because they understand when things need to come off the grill plate, how long things can stay in a bain-marie or whatever. So, it was one of those things where probably, 25 years ago or something, McDonald's was the thing. Like, if someone had worked at McDonald's from the age of 15, you would look at them and say, these kids know a bit about hard work, a bit about making commercial decisions. They've probably had some level of manager role even at a very young age because that's the sort of way McDonald's worked. I'm not sure if it still does, but how important is that, growing up? Because I think we're in an age now where a lot of young people don't have a part-time job because they are, they've got a lot of sport, they're focusing on school and all of that sort of stuff. Do you think there's been a shift in the way young people think about work and stuff because they may have not had that experience, or have we seen a shift in the bottom end of where people get their early experience? What do you think has been one of the factors there? Yeah, I throw that to both of you.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking through the people we work with. I've always had an appetite for employing people that come from the bush because they're not city-centric.
Yep.
And
they've probably moved out of home early on, they're a bit more independent.
Early responsibility.
And they've been involved in sport and some of these things. The McDonald's thing's a good point. I'm thinking of in my own family group, that sort of training, and for myself personally, factories, warehouses, pubs, you name it.
Yeah.
Market research, everything else you can think of. Yeah. And among our team at the moment, we've got people that have come from other countries to resettle in Australia, or in one interesting case, one of our lawyers used to work in a supermarket. Now, we actually act now for supermarkets, and it's fantastic to have that knowledge of how to act for a supermarket when you've worked in one.
Yeah.
So it's really useful because you've got that, all of a sudden, you've got that extra sense.
Yeah.
So there's some examples.
Yeah.
It's coming down to that, expanding the horizon. The McDonald's is giving you the insight into how a business can operate efficiently, how you can have an impact on the business. Yeah. You don't flip the burger doesn't go out.
Yeah.
There's no customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
So it's understanding that whole process as well. You're playing on a sporting team, you don't get the ball, you don't pass it to the next person.
Yeah.
There can't be a basket, you don't get the result at the end. The coach can be your mentor as well, so they're giving you an understanding of principles. So all those sort of things, you just got to say, why am I doing this?
Yes. Yeah.
And what's the result we're trying to achieve? Who's affected?
Yeah.
Now, just to go on a bit on that same theme, you're talking about getting outside your comfort zone. I remember as a young lawyer, I got involved in Law Institute committees.
Yeah.
And that was sensational. And in fact, when I got onto the Law Institute Council, I was, early 30s. And you had a choice. It was a bit like getting into Parliament and having a choice of portfolio. You had a choice of what committee you can get onto. And so I looked at all the committees at the time because that's all they had. They didn't have the big sections. And there was one called the Commercial Law Committee. And I said, I'll go on that. And I didn't even know about commercial law at that stage. So I get on it, and all these, and they're all blokes, were wondering what the hell I was doing there, because I just come from Camberwell, and they were the heads of all the big city firms, and there were about 6 of them. There were about 6 of them, and there's me.
Yeah.
And that actually taught me a huge amount, because there I was working all this stuff out with these people.
Yeah.
And the fact that they were all individuals and they all had their own quirks and personalities.
Yeah.
So, that gives you another base, and then you've got another one, etc.
Yeah.
So you really, as you said, get out and have a shot at stuff.
Yeah. The value of spending time in places that are not your usual places. And whether it even be travel or overseas experiences and things like that. Like we, hugely encourage the team here to take those opportunities to travel and do what they need to do, so that they've got a bit more forethought about what it is. And particularly, as you said, Peter, people in, we deal with businesses who have overseas trading entities, etc. And it's important for people to understand that we're not just Camberwell or Hawthorn East centric anymore. The world is a much broader place, and you can get access to information from all sorts of things. Are there places where the two of you will always go for information? Julie and I were talking about this the other day as well on another podcast episode. What are the places that you find key to giving you the information that help you with your broader worldview, as well as, having a more commercial outlook?
Off you go, Paul.
No, you have to list out all of the places you go for information, Paul. I mean, we used to open up a newspaper in the morning, and that used to be the way we got our news of the world, and I don't think that's the way we do it anymore. I know some people do. It's
books.
Yep.
Books are a big resource.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn a lot from people's experiences.
Yep.
And it's not about what's happening now; it's what's happened as well. So history is a big resource that I rely on, and also our clients as well. They can give us a lot of information about what's happening in the world, what's happening in their industry, what's happening in their universe. So apart from the obvious answer would be the internet. Wise Guide would be the obvious one.
Nobody else has access to Wise Guide though, Paul. That's just our little private thing that we...
Okay, I'll give you a totally different answer.
Yeah, sure. Go on.
I do read the newspaper every morning.
Yeah.
And we do listen to a podcast over breakfast every morning.
Yeah.
But going back to when I started in practice, I was thrown into a room with a big filing cabinet full of active files.
Yeah.
Right.
As an article clerk. And off you go. Yeah. Good luck. And it was everything in that cabinet. Or it was more than one, actually. So there was no way I knew anything about how to do it because uni was hopeless. It was a really sterile environment. There was no practical training at that time.
I don't think that's changed a lot, Peter.
So
I think unis are still doing a lot of not practical training.
Yeah. Well, that's right. But at least we've got interns here now who are learning, which is fantastic. Yeah. So what I used to do was to try to work it out right from the outset from other people. So you'd ring your mates or you'd have barristers, someone else who knew.
Yep.
Now, that's still the case. Not that I have obviously it's more barristers now, and but the other thing is that it's critical from my point of view to go and see the client at the client's premises.
Yes.
You've got to see how they operate.
Yep.
That's vital, and it's also instructive because if you understand whatever the hell they're doing, the production line or the way they deal with their staff, and same as if you come in to our office, you can tell in a minute what
the
we're
environment
like.
that they're operating in.
Yeah. So you've got to go there to see the clients, and they respect it. They enjoy your company. They think it's fantastic, and it's a really weird thing that I've always been advocating this for years. But it's still remarked on that you do it because they say, a lawyer's coming to see me, and they'll introduce you around, and they'll say, "This is the lawyer, my lawyer, or our lawyer," and it's a wonderful thing because once you've got that knowledge as to how they operate, you're just miles ahead. And I know, Paul, this is something you've done for years.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I think we think those things are common sense. I'm going to talk about common sense now as well because I think that's an interesting one. We think, our generation, I don't think it's even our generation because I think there's a lot of people in our generations who don't have a lot of common sense either, but common sense is not very common. So you would think that being a business advisor in any level, whether it be accounting or legal or wealth or finance, you would want to be out in the client's workplace and understand them as much as possible. And I don't think that's very common. I think it's common within our walls because that's what we expect and anticipate and value. But I don't think it's common out there because I think the feedback that I get from businesses when they come to us to say, could you please be my advisor, is I've never had this advice before, or nobody's ever come out to see my business before. So if we're talking about young people coming through into commercial situations, maybe they need to look outside of what they think is common sense to say, okay, what should I be doing? Where should I be getting my advice from and things like that? So if we're thinking about what is common and uncommon, it is not common for people to go out to people's businesses. It's common in this room, but it's not common out there. And we find that a lot. Like people come to us for advice saying, I've never heard this information before. And we're sort of sitting there going, I can't understand that. So if you were talking to young people, if, for instance, let's pretend we're in a university situation right now and you are standing up there giving some employment advice to these young people, how do we get that through to them? How do we get it through to them? How do we get it through to our team, people who may want to come and work with Aintree Group, for instance? How do we start communicating to people that they need to think outside the box?
They need to ask the questions. That's important. So when they're going to be coming into an employment situation, it's making sure that they're challenging their managers and challenging the people ahead of them and saying, even just, I want to be involved in that meeting. I want to be involved in, giving that client advice. So it's making sure that they're involved at the next level so they can see where they can get to as well. So if you're just going to sit there and you're just going to process a tax return or process a property transaction or something like that, that's all you're ever going to do. You're never going to anything more than that because you're not challenging yourself. So we've got to make sure that they understand that by challenging themselves and by pushing themselves outside their comfort zone, that they're going to get a result and they're going to get a better result for their clients as well as just for them as well. So understanding how the world works and understanding that you can be a bigger part of that world by asking that next question, by pushing the employer, all those sort of things will make them a better person to work with us as well. So.
I'm quite unfamiliar now with how they teach law in the universities, but I could imagine that what seems to be missing is you don't actually understand how it works or how it connects to reality. And there's so many everyday situations that are really relevant that you wouldn't know that this subject contract applies to, contracts and what a contract is. So you might read that, you've got offer and acceptance and consideration and all this stuff. But when you actually see what a contract is and what can happen as a result of it in a modern context, that's what I would have thought. You need context. Now, how do you get that message across? I suppose you've got to challenge them to explain to you what this means, how it. So you put it back on them, because we used to sit in lecture theatres and somebody would talk and you would write notes, or if you're like me, you didn't write notes. You waited till Neil Young, I'll mention his name, finished the year before, and you'd get his notes and you'd look at them a couple of weeks before the exams and you'd pass. But the pardon me, but the way it needs to work is you need to have the people engaged and understand what's relevant and why it's relevant. And that means they've got to be involved. It doesn't get pushed to them. You've got to pull them through.
And I think that what you mentioned before about interns is important. I've mentioned previously in discussions with Andrea that part of my journey was going out and second year uni and saying, I don't understand what I'm doing. I don't understand what I'm reading. And I said, the only way that I can understand it is to go and do it. So I actually went part-time in my second and third year of my course, and to me that was the most beneficial thing I ever did, because I was working in it day to day, and all of a sudden tax made sense, and I just breezed through the next exams, the compliance, all the laws that we were taught, the legislation, court cases and all that sort of stuff that we were talking about, I could actually apply them in day-to-day stuff that I was doing in a very first-year job. But I was being challenged within that job, and it made sense. So all of a sudden the connection, I was connected to the work I was doing, and it made sense. So that's another bit of advice that I'd give someone sitting in a university theatre. Go and get practical application of the work that you're considering doing.
And the other thing that you've just reminded me of, Paul, when I started as an article clerk, one of my mates had already kicked off his articles about a month or two before me, and he was at the Fitzroy Legal Service as a volunteer.
Yep.
So as soon as I started, that's where I went.
Yeah.
And that was terrific. We were there one night a week, and after about 6 months, we realised that the Collingwood Council was also paying for the Fitzroy Legal Service, and a few of us some of them were, like Trotskyites, said, well, that's not fair to the Collingwood Council. We've actually got to go to Collingwood. Yeah. So we seceded from Fitzroy and we set up the Collingwood Legal Service in the Collingwood Town Hall, which I went to one night a week for 10 years or more until I was involved in other things and couldn't do it anymore. But that was terrific because that's nothing to do with day-to-day practice.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's also, being involved in the community and people over the road in the commission flats were always giving us a lot of business. Yeah. And I would take leave from work and go and appear in the courts as for free. Yeah. And do that sort of stuff.
And probably dealing with a completely different cohort to what you'd be doing inside a CBD practice.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
It gives you a more rounded view.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The true meaning of what a professional is, in fact.
Yeah. And actually helping you develop a mindset that is not just, I just do this task-oriented thing. Yeah. Because I think that's what we're, when we're talking about commercial mindset, we're talking about not being task-oriented. Yes, the task has to be done, but we're not task-oriented. When you have a commercial mindset, you're thinking about what this task means to everything else that happens around and the value of experience while you're working. I think, there's a really fine line for young people these days where if they're living out of home, they've got, living pressures, life is expensive. When the three of us went to university, we probably didn't have to pay the HECS fees and all of that sort of stuff as what our kids are now having to do and young people are doing these days. So the opportunity to spend time in volunteer situations and things is a little bit of a luxury, right? So we've got to, put it to that. But knowing the industries that we are in and even external businesses where they're looking for team members, I think, one of the biggest things for, a university cohort, regardless of where you are looking to study or wanting to be involved in, is try and get a job in the area that you may wish to work in.
Yep.
And therefore you are getting that experience that you need along the way. Like our interns here, they're getting a huge amount of value. We're lucky that our interns are the sorts of people who are actively seeking work anyway.
Yeah, with the right mindset.
Exactly, with that mindset. But, just as a piece of advice for young people who are listening is that, get yourself at least something, a number of hours in the business, the field that you might want to be in.
And then there's the opposite view.
Of course.
So
the contrary.
I'm thinking of a fellow who was a terrific rugby player at uni. He was doing med, and he and a number of people would go up to Gove. He was a very, very big, strong bloke. Go up to Gove Peninsula to work over the summer, and in the heat, like terribly difficult work.
Yeah. Yep.
But in any event, he decided that ultimately, after he started off in his medical career, he ended up at Médecins Sans Frontières, right? Working in the third world and running the show because he'd been up to Gove as a labourer and he'd worked out there are parts of the world that need help. So it's not always, you don't know the course you're going to end up on. So the general experience can be actually life-changing. Yeah. And that, I suppose, in a sense, that's why when I left legal practice, which I did after a couple of decades in the beginning, I went into something that was quite different. Why would you go into a design business and set one up in an area that didn't really even exist at that time? Yeah. And the reason was there are other things that mattered, like there were the arts and there was the magnificent design that you could, appreciate if you had an opportunity, and the wonderful things that you could create. Not that I could do it, but you could work with these people.
Yeah.
So it's an open mind, I think, because you don't know where you're going to go next. And Andrea, you're probably the same. Not necessarily today, but in the past, there would have been a lot of things that were sliding door moments.
Yes. Yeah. And I think maybe we'll end on this point because these words, and I'm going to use them in a blog post. Thank you. There are other things that matter.
Yes.
I think that's like, if there was a Peter Gandolfo quote that I was going to put on a wall somewhere at Aintree Group, there are other things that matter. And I think that, when we're talking about commercial mindset, if everybody who is doing something somewhere can just sit back for 30 seconds and think to themselves, there are other things that matter, I think the whole world would change because we often get really, really bogged down in our day-to-day of what we're doing. And if all we did was every few hours something popped up on your Windows screen in your office and said there are other things that matter, it would make you stand up and go, okay, I need to take some time, or maybe I'll go and connect with a team member or something like that, or maybe I'll call a client. And I think, that's probably the if we could take one thing away from this conversation about commerciality and having a mindset that is client-focused and people-focused and intention and connection-focused, it is that there are other things that matter. So thank you both for joining today. This is we could have a whole podcast series about commercial mindset and giving advice to young people about how they can progress in their careers and things like that. And we could ask these questions a lot. So I think we'll come back to the conversation, maybe from a different standpoint, because there's so many other things that we can still talk about and give some value. So thank you both for taking time out of the day today to join us, and we'll see you back here next time.
Great. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Andrea. Good on you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Well done.
Thank you all for joining this podcast episode of Plant, Grow, Reap. You can find us on all of the platforms. If we've mentioned any particular things today that you need links to, our team will put all of those links in our social media and our YouTube channel. So thanks for joining us today.